The story I'm about to tell you is set nearby in the magnificent Eildon Hills, which dominate this landscape for miles around, revered by the Celts and by the Romans, and in whose foothills Abbotsford nestles. This story was collected by Scott as a young man from a Mrs. Brown. He later published it in his Letters on Demonology and Witchcraft. And it resonates with his impressive collection of armour and weaponry that he has gracing the walls of his entrance hall and of his armoury here at Abbotsford. This story is called Canobie Dick. Many, many years ago, there lived in the Borders a bold horse dealer who went by the name of Canobie Dick. Now, Canobie Dick was the kind of man that liked to laugh and a drink, but he had a hot and unpredictable temper which made him both admired and somewhat dreaded amongst his friends and neighbours. Now, one night he was travelling back across the Eildon Hills under a full moon with a pair of horses that he'd had no luck in selling at the fair. He was crossing over the place called Bowden Moor, a place made famous by the meeting of Thomas the Rhymer and the Queen of the Fairies. Not that Canobie Dick had any thoughts of that at all in his head. He knew the place like the back of his hand by day and by night. But he was surprised when suddenly, as if out of nowhere, there rose up in front of him a stranger. He was an old man with long hair and beard which shone silvery in the moonlight. And his clothes, they were antique, but seemed to be made of rich and noble stuff. Before Dick could open his mouth, the old man asked him the price of his horses and if they were for sale. Now, to Dick, a man was a man and a deal was a deal. And to tell you the truth, he would have sold horses to the devil himself if he could. And he would have paid no attention at all to his pointy tail and cloven hooves. And he would have tried to get the best of the deal as well. So there they were, under the moon, bartering away. And after a while they came to an agreeable price. Dick watched eagerly as the stranger took out from underneath his cloak a leathern purse and opened the strings, took out some fat gold coins which he pressed into Dick's outstretched hand. Glimmering in the moonlight, Dick could see that they were old, no longer in common currency, but they were unicorns and bonnet pieces. Old gold, rich gold, and he knew that he had made the very best of the deal. And then the stranger said that if Dick would come again in 7 nights' time, to the same place, at the same time, with more horses and alone, that he would buy them as well, and also for a good price. And so it was that they met again and again and again and again under the moon and the stars in the lonely Eildon Hills. And much gold and many horses were past hands. Well, now, I'm not sure if it was that Dick became greedy, or if he became nosy, or if he was just plain curious as to where the old man bided. But he began to wheedle and complain that a dry deal was bad luck, and that really they should seal the deal with a dram. The old stranger looked Dick in the face, and he said ominously, "You may see my dwelling if you will, but if you lose courage at what you see there, you will rue it all the days of your life." Well, Dick snorted. He wasn't about to be put off so easily as that. So he leapt off his horse and he tied the reins to a thorn bush and followed the old stranger up the hill. They made their way to a place between two peaks known locally as the Luck and Hare for its appearance. This was a place notorious for its witch meetings. Not that Canobie Dick was bothered by any such superstition as that. But he was very surprised when the old stranger stopped in front of what looked like the entrance to a cavern or a cave on the hillside, which Dick had never ever seen before or heard of before in all of his life. Now the stranger turned and looked down on Dick, and in the moonlight his eyes shone steely, and he said, "You may still return if you will." Dick swallowed, but he was too far in now to go back through any fear or misgiving, and instead he followed the stranger inside the hill. The dark in there was so thick and heavy that Dick had to put his hand on the old man's shoulder to stop himself from falling over. On and on they went, until suddenly a gloomy light started to grow around them, and Dick was aghast to see that he was inside a stable, and that there were stalls on either side as they travelled through, and in each stall there stood a coal-black horse, all saddled and bridled, and next to each horse there lay a knight, all dressed in coal-black armour, with a sword drawn and clasped against his chest. The hair prickled up on the back of Dick's neck, and he followed through as they continued through the stable. Then the light grew and grew until they burst into an immense cavern of huge proportions, which was hung all around with flaming torches, which threw dancing lights flickering all over the walls, but even they couldn't reach the lofty heights of the ceiling. Dick's brow burst with sweat, his knees shook, and his hands shook too as he followed the stranger across the long hall, and his spirit was quelled by the supernatural powers of the hall. At the end, they came to a long, low table on which glimmered a long sword which was all finely wrought in engravings, and next to the sword there was a weird old hunting horn. The stranger moved behind the table, turned round and pulled himself up to his full height. And now his eyes, as he pinned Dick, his eyes were full of the dancing lights of the burning torches. And he spoke and said, "He who lifts that sword and blows that horn shall, if his heart not fail him, be king over all broad Britain. But much depends upon courage, and whether he lift the sword or the horn first. So speaks the tongue that cannot lie." And with that, Dick's heart dropped down into his boots as he realised what he should have realised before, was that this stranger was none other than the legendary Thomas the Rhymer. His hands shook so much, his knees knocked, and his courage escaped him entirely. He reached out a trembling hand towards the sword, but then he thought, no, maybe if I lift the sword, then that might seem like an act of aggression against the powerful spirits of the mountain. And instead, he moved his hand to the horn, and he lifted up the horn and raised it to his lips and blew a feeble note. Feeble the note may have been, but the response was terrible. The horses leapt to their feet. They stamped the ground, they ground their bits, they shook their bridles and they snorted. The knights leapt to their feet and roared and clashed their swords against their chests. And then the whole army, which had been as still and as silent as the grave, rushed upon Dick. In terror he dropped the horn and he made a grasp for the sword, but it was too late. A hurricane of irresistible fury rolled into the hall. It rolled around the walls and the ceiling with thunderclaps, snuffing out the lights and rolling up the unfortunate horse dealer in its wake. And then he was propelled and rolled and thrust back down through the stables, out through the tunnel and spat out of the entrance into the cold night air, where he fell down onto the scree at the foot of the hills. And it was there, in the cold light of dawn, that the shepherds found Canobie Dick. And he had only breath left in his body to tell them his fearful tale.